More often than not, doing jobs for family, friends, or even yourself ends up being a disaster, even though it seems like a win-win at the time. Don't miss this episode where we unpack how doing jobs for family and friends can turn into a nightmare and what you need to do to stop this happening to you and your business. This project turned into an absolute nightmare.
I'd rather give it to you than someone else. And all this sounds really good, but it can be a little bit insidious.
And when things go wrong with people you care about, the stress is magnified.
Maybe I can save my mate some money.
Because there is no free lunch with this stuff.
Why is it such a bad idea to do jobs for family and friends?
And they thought they were doing a job to help each other out. But there were so many red flags, so many learnings from this. Probably should have known to start with, but they didn't. But they do now. Well, welcome to the Profitable Tradie podcast. Tony Fraser-Jones here, your host, with my co-host Phil Smith.
G'day.
You going good, buddy?
Always, mate, always.
Awesome. Let's get into this juicy topic today.
Yeah, 100%. Hey, so look, it feels like a win-win when you get to do a job for a mate or a family member. You know, maybe you're helping each other out, I don't know, or at least it's pitched to you that way. Or maybe you're doing a job for yourself on the cheap. You know, there's something that you want to get done. Might be a reno, you know, getting yourself a new kitchen or bathroom, or maybe you're building your own house, and you're thinking, I'll save myself some money and I'll just do this for myself. Or maybe I can save my mate some money or my family member, or maybe they just want to give the job to me because you know, I'd rather give it to you than someone else. And all this sounds really good, but it can be a little bit insidious.
It can be a bit tricky, and sometimes you just do some work to keep your team busy as well. On your own projects or whatever it is. Now, like you said, Phil, you're an insightful man. I don't want to blow smoke up your butt, but it looks good on the surface. We're not talking about your butt there.
Yeah,
but,
well, I was going to say, and there's already a lot of smoke and cobwebs up there.
That's right. Anyway, it looks good on the surface, but there are a bunch of potential fish hooks here that can really go wrong. Like, this stuff unravels so often. And so the pod today is really about understanding what all these fish hooks are, because often you don't realize them until you get into it and it's too late.
Absolutely.
And then so we want to talk about what those fish hooks are so you can make a good decision, and then also how to avoid them, which is really what you want to do.
That is it. So I'm sure you got a story to kick us off.
I do have a story. Back early days, actually coaching, had a client, they're actually a building contractor, and I won't mention their name. Be funny too, but I won't. Anyway, They were building a house for a friend of theirs through their church. And it was a substantial home, a big home, very nice home on a lifestyle section, like a large block. And this project turned into an absolute nightmare. Split the church, arguments all around. Now, our clients at the time were the builders, and they weren't getting paid. They said the client was being unreasonable. Said the client had agreed to do some variations, and then said they hadn't agreed to do them and wouldn't pay for them. It was a nightmare. It was tearing these people apart. Funny story is that a few weeks later, my wife was talking to her old boss, who was telling them about the building nightmare they were having with the building contractor who was unreasonable and wouldn't do what they said and wasn't coming up to the party, and how difficult it was working with these building contractor because they were someone who was in their church.
Oh, no.
It was the same job.
Eesh.
And it really caused a massive amount of tension, and double tension, because they were actually friends and part of the same community, and they thought they were doing a job to help each other out. But there were so many red flags, so many learnings from this that they probably should have known to start with, but they didn't. But they do now.
Well, they do. And I'm sure that, what people want to know, I mean, why is it such a bad idea to do jobs for family and friends?
Yeah. Well, it's not always a bad idea, but mostly.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way. It puts a lot of pressure on relationships. I think that's the thing. And building projects, construction projects and jobs are kind of complex, and stuff goes wrong. So, it can put a lot of strain on the relationships. And you, as the service provider, you can often feel really unappreciated. Because the friend or your family member doesn't really understand all the work that goes into it. They're never really going to understand that. And so you feel like you're putting in the yards for them, and they're not really, showing you the love back. So that can make you feel really unappreciated. And there is lots of stress when things go wrong. And with any sort of building project, if you've done any building ever, any construction project, things go wrong. That's just the nature of it. That's part of what you've got to do. And so a lot of pressure comes on.
Yeah, 100%.
And also, even if you do, jobs for yourself, sometimes you can alienate your own team because you're under stress. You can't, got double pressure on them, or maybe they think the boss is, being a bit unreasonable or getting a free lunch, or how lucky is he to have this nice house. And what can happen is it can actually cripple your business financials. It can end up with low profit if you don't price the jobs properly or do them for yourself. That impacts your cash flow. If you do jobs for yourself, sometimes that can affect your, the business financials. You can't borrow money because the banks won't, borrow because your financials just don't look right. So there's a whole bunch of layers to this that we really need to unpack so you don't get caught.
Yeah, 100%. Whereas on the other hand, if we're, doing the right stuff with our mates and actually, putting this in the right sort of context, we can avoid some of these problems.
Yeah, I mean, you get clear expectations so everyone knows what they're up for, which is a huge part of success. You can protect your cash flow. You can, maintain a strong margin, good P&L, good cash flow, maintain your borrowing power, all that sort of stuff. You maintain the relationship. That's very important because, you don't want things to go south. And there's a lot less stress.
Yeah, big time.
And when things go wrong with people you care about, the stress is magnified. So we just don't want that to happen.
Yeah, totally. Well, let's pick the problem apart a little bit more and just, really get into what actually makes this a bad thing.
Yeah, well, it's the stress on relationships. And, you often feel obligated. Well, they might feel obligated to give you the job, and you often feel obligated to actually do the job, and you feel obligated to give them some sort of deal. So often you tend to sharpen your pencil for family and friends because, you want to look after them. And the question then is, well, would they do the same for you?
So, yeah, I mean, sometimes they wouldn't do the same for you, but also, sometimes the really hard part is that they just put you in a difficult situation. Like maybe they don't even really want the job for cheap right from the start. Maybe they say, no, look, I'd just rather pay you than someone else. And they say, come on, no, honestly, I'll pay you a full rate. Like, please don't give me a discount. That's not what I'm doing this for. But the hard part is they don't realize that one way or another they have put you in a position where you do kind of feel that pressure, even if they're not intending to put it on you, and even if you're not, being asked to sharpen the pencil or anything, and even if you don't, you still might not charge them for those extra hours you had to put in. You might not call out that variation that they asked for. You might not, worry about having to try to, push this job through, in the most sort of efficient way because you think I'll take that extra time. It's my friend. I want to make sure it's perfect. And so one way or another, you do end up sharpening that pencil, even if you're clear with each other that you won't. You can still fall into that trap, right?
You can. Look, construction projects of any nature, which is typically what we'd be talking about here, they are difficult. They have dramas. Things go wrong. You do get frustrated with each other from time to time, even in the best kind of thing. But when it's a family relationship or a friend, that's really amped up, and it's difficult. There is a relationship tax there. And so you start to perhaps question the motives of each other. You wonder if, someone's trying to take a shortcut, or why didn't they, do it the way you asked them to do it. Whatever that is, it just puts pressure on that whole relationship, which is stressful. And then when money's involved, things change. That's the key thing here. When money's on the line, it changes people's attitudes. And so they get more picky, they're more exacting, and they just want things to be done right. And they don't want to pay more. Maybe they don't have more money, and that can really sometimes make clients become quite difficult as well, even when they wouldn't, you wouldn't have picked it. And that can bring out that from your family and friends that you didn't really expect. So that's something to look out for. And when it is stressful just with a person you don't know, it's super stressful. But it's someone when you do know, you've got to talk to them outside of the job, maybe their family, whatever. It can make a huge amount of stress for you and for them as well.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the next big one that stands out for me is often with this problem is that it can be positioned to you in a way that sounds like it's from a good place. So, your family or your friends might say, "Oh, I just really want to help out your business. I really want to give you the opportunity to make some extra money and get a big job or something like that." And so it sounds like it's a really, really, altruistic thing and that they're just trying to help. But the reality is, I mean, there might be some of that in there, but there's always going to be an element of they also want you to either do it for a bit cheaper, which could really be the motive, or that they think that you will take an extra level of care or, go the extra mile that somebody else may not have gone. And so the thing is like even that expectation is actually asking you to do it cheaper, just in disguise. For example, hey, look, instead of going and getting an air conditioning unit bought from, a normal sort of service technician, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to buy it from Home Depot or Bunnings or whatever, and then I'm going to ask my friend who's an electrician to install it for me, And as much as I'm happy to pay and I'd rather just give him the job, I am kind of hoping he just wants a box of beers for the service. And so the hard part is there is an expectation that's felt from you and from other people, and they probably are angling for something, even if it's just for you to go above and beyond, which is actually not free. And so the thing is, if you would have charged someone else for the extra work and you don't charge them, then you are giving them a discount. And so what you really got to look at is how you actually value your time here. Like, if you're going to do something for somebody at any kind of discount, even if it's a discount of I'm not going to charge you for the extra effort, then the hard part is that you're actually devaluing your time and what you could have made for that time, and therefore, you're selling yourself short.
Yeah, and so, doing jobs for family and friends, there's a bunch at stake. They're obviously more stressful, and, not everyone's motives with this are pure. There is often some self-interest involved, and I find that hard to believe because I tend to see the good in people, but there are definitely family and friends who are, they're on the make. They want to see how they can cut it to suit them.
And there's definitely some family and friends that you never really hear from until they realise that you're in the trade that you're in, and then suddenly you hear from them.
But best buddies.
But only ever when they've got a really good job that they just don't want to give to someone else. Yeah.
Well, and sometimes it's not even the big jobs, like the small jobs, just a small repair. They're the ones that they expect you to do for free because it's not worth much. But actually, the opportunity cost of doing that is quite large. So you've got to be really careful with that.
Oh, absolutely. My dad was actually a classic for this. If people haven't heard before, my dad's an electrician, and I once asked him to come around and just give me a hand with something. It was a very, very simple job. The thing is, I was just a bit scared to do it myself, if I'm honest. It required drilling through the side of my house to install something I could have done myself. Which again, famous last words of any DIY expert, right? But anyway, I'm about to do it, and I called my dad and said, "Hey, do you reckon you can give me a hand?" Just because, I don't want to muck it up. And he said no and hung up. Now again, my dad's a great guy. This is not a dig at him. But I asked him about it later. I was like, "What was that about?" And he's like, "I just wanted to make it very clear. I don't do any work for family and friends. It's nothing personal, man. It's just, look, if anything went wrong with that, or if there's any drama or anything like that, then I just don't want that to ever be a thing between us." And I'm not going to do it for free either, so you might as well just pay somebody else, and I don't mind missing the job. It's better for my headspace. So
family and friends, that's a challenge. And then similar but slightly different is doing jobs for yourself, which is interesting. So it feels like a real win. You do the job for yourself, you can do it cheap, and you're going to kind of win here. We had a client, let's call him
Mikey.
Sure. Okay, Mikey.
Yeah.
And Mikey was building a lovely new house for himself. It was a nice house. It was several $100,000 worth of build cost a few years ago. Probably cost 3 times as much now, but that's a whole other thing, right?
At the time.
That
was a lot of money at the time.
It was a lot of money at the time. And for months and months and months, Mikey had issues with the profitability of his business. He had massive cash flow problems. He was incredibly stressed out. And he's like, "What's wrong with my business? What's going on?" Well, he was running everything for his home through his business. All the materials for building the business, all the labor for doing the work, all the plumbing work was coming through his business. And so all the stuff was happening at cost. There was no margin going on stuff. And basically he was just burning the cash in his business to fund his house. It was a false economy. Like, it completely stuffed the profitability of his business. Massive opportunity cost, because all the money all the time that he'd spent on his house could have been billed to someone else for a margin. And there was a huge amount of stress as well. So he not only did he have the pressure of building a house, but now he had the pressure of a business that was actually kind of failing, was struggling to pay its bills, because basically he was using his own business as a bank to do his own cheap house build. Not only that, it was difficult for him to sort out the borrowing as well, because now his financials were in tatters, and the bank was like, "Well, where's the money?" It was a complete and utter cluster, which could have been avoided. And the simple rule here is that, look, if you can't afford to pay someone else to do that project, then you've got to think really seriously about whether you can afford to do it through your business as well, because there is no free lunch with this stuff.
Yeah, and there's the opportunity cost as well of what you could have done with that time. And I think the thing is that sometimes we can feel a sense of security because the guys are busy. But the really hard part, especially if you're going through a light phase in terms of your workflow pipeline, you think, well, I could put them to good use on my own job, and at least I'm not wasting the money then. But the reality is that sometimes being in that spot of bother for work is going to be a fire under your ass to do something about it. I once had a good mate who's he ran an electrical business, And every now and then I'd get home from work and my lawn was mowed. And I'd be like, what's going on here? And then he'd text me and be like, how's the lawn? And I'm like, what happened? And he's like, oh, boys had a couple gaps in the calendar and I didn't want to waste their time. And we were in the neighborhood and I mowed your lawn. And I'm just thinking to myself, I'm like, it's cool that they felt busy and that you thought that time was well utilized. But what would really get you moving to fill your pipeline is having them literally sitting in your workshop. That'll make you really get going. If you think they're put to good use, especially on a good project, like something significant for yourself, then the pressure to actually go and make use of that opportunity cost isn't the same. And so you don't. And so sometimes you need that pressure. You don't want them to be busy on something that's less profitable. Another client I can think of, again, won't name names, but they're actually in a partnership.
This gets really interesting.
Well, partnerships are really difficult, right? Because when you start doing jobs for yourself, it's like, how do you make that fair in a partnership by putting that through the business? So let's call these partners Phil and Tony for just for interest sake. So
perhaps Tony and Phil's more appropriate.
Well,
I don't
I'd
know.
say Phil and Tony, but that's
whatever.
Anyway, the surname was Smith, that's for sure. So Phil
it wasn't Tony Smith, by the way.
Oh, come on, mate. Anyway, here we go. So Phil and Tony are in a business partnership, and so the hard part is that if Tony wanted to do a job around his house, then they'd put it through the business, and Tony would square that up with Phil. Vice versa. Phil wanted to do a project around his house, then that's cool. He'd square that up with Tony later. They'd put it through the business. They'd save money, and they'd square it up. But the hard part is that you can't really square that up, because if I'm using the resources of the business, the materials that we bought, the time of our guys that we're paying to do a job at my house, and I reimburse the business the cost of those time and materials, I haven't reimbursed the business the opportunity cost of the margin we didn't make from those time and materials. And so the reality is, if I was ever, going to have a job where Phil went and did a job for myself, and I was going to square up with you, Tony, then the hard part is what I should really be squaring up is the cost of the time, the cost of the materials, and the margin we would have put on those time and materials, in which case I'm paying full price for it anyway. And on top of that is it's money we now can't split. It's money where we can't make even better margins. And so the really hard thing is that there's no way to actually square that up, and it can never really be fair. So you'd actually be better off, for me, Phil, to have paid for the job myself with somebody else, which does feel weird because you're like, I'd rather get it done myself. But if I did that externally, then the big thing is that we can actually just utilize the time and materials we pay for on something that's fairly divided as a partnership. And so it really has to be that way. Not to mention that if me, Phil, if I'm getting a job done and these clients, this actually happened where their job was being done at one of their houses, and as usual, things went wrong, expectations weren't met, and so the time and materials were used again and again. And how do you square that up? Because if you were doing that for someone else and you had to do the rework, the person wouldn't have paid twice. So how do you square that? It just can't work, really. There's way too much risk involved. And so
it's very difficult. Or at the very least, you invoice your business properly, from your business to yourself properly for the job. And the money cycles around. I mean, you're kind of not losing there. There's maybe a few tax implications, but you're kind of not losing because you're getting the money from the other, but it makes the business work properly. And with the materials too, like it's fine to pass the materials on at cost. I get that. Maybe there's an advantage there. But the thing is, you then run the P&L in your business, and all the margins and your P&Ls are completely screwed, and you're trying to figure out why this business is not working. Well, because your margins aren't right, because you've passed through stuff at cost, and that's all going to show up in your P&L. So you've got to have a way of actually pulling it out. It's very difficult to unpick. It gets super complicated. It takes a bunch of time, and if you don't do it, you think things aren't working properly, and then you kind of go crazy as well.
Yeah, or what happens is, and this is what I found quite a lot of times, because I know there'll be people listening to thinking, Tone, like, yeah, but if I put it through the business, at least, that's pre-tax money and all that. And I hear that. But, the one hard thing with this, it's like you said, is it throws the financials out. And then what you do is you put a big fat asterisk next to those financial results because they're wrong, but they're wrong because. And so you put an asterisk and you don't look any deeper. When in reality, there could have been other things going on that month or in those jobs or whatever that actually were costing you real margin that you need to dig into and improve, but you don't even look because there's an asterisk and you think that explains everything, and so you don't look any deeper and you miss a whole bunch of other stuff. And we see this all the time, and usually you end up paying more for the job than you would have paid if you paid someone else. So, I mean, honestly, there's just too much to lose.
It's super tricky, so you have to be very tight with it. If you're going to go down this path, suggest you be very careful about going down this path.
100%. Well, should we get into what's the fix?
Well, the fix, I think, is very clear. If you're working with family and friends, more is at stake here than any other job. So you've got to make sure that everything is above board. You have to have really clear contracts, clear expectations, fair market rates, how you're going to get paid, when you're going to get paid. If you get credit card details from a normal client before you do a job, do it with your family and friends. So it's all the same process. In fact, it's probably better if you have a team and they deal with a lot of it, because it takes all the, the kind of emotion and that sort of stuff out of it. So be really tight with the communication as well. This is massive. So communication is the key to, successful projects. And particularly, obviously, the longer they are, the more important it is, because there's more complexity going on. There's more stuff happening, more stuff to do. So over-communicate even more with your family and friends on the job than you would with someone else.
I think that's key. It's not just doing your normal process, it's literally doing way more than your normal process when you're talking about communicating expectations or contracts or payment terms or anything like that. I would also get into communicating like, hey, if there is a breakdown in communication, how will we deal with that? If there is an unmet expectation, how will we deal with that? If there's a variation, how will we deal with that? In anything along the lines. Like if something goes wrong, like list out specific things that could go wrong and talk about how you'll deal with it, because again, there's just too much at stake and too much emotion involved if something does go wrong.
Yeah, and then if you do end up doing your own work, just price it fully, like treat it like another job. So you get an accurate description in your business of what's happening, because if you don't have that right accuracy of your business financials, it is an absolute mind bend. And I know a lot of people listening probably aren't across that already. You need to if you're not.
Yeah, well, it's a different story.
That's a different story, because it will change your life. But you want clear financials so you understand how the business is tracking, at least on a monthly basis, so then you can make the decisions you need to get the results that you want.
Yeah, 100%. I think last thing for me is just don't fall into that trap if you think it's going to be cheaper or easier, or that trap of, hey, look, this will keep the guys busy during a quiet period. Any of that stuff, it feels true, and on the surface it kind of is, but underneath that surface is just so much insidious stuff that's going to go wrong that it's honestly just not worth the risk most of the time. So should we land this plane?
Let's do it. So whilst doing jobs for your family and friends, or even yourself, can feel like a real win, it's often a complete disaster that leaves all the parties feeling frustrated and disappointed. Now, anytime family and friends and money are involved, you've got to tread really carefully. So if you're brave enough to do your own work, make sure all the I's are dotted and the T's crossed before you start, and charge full price and over-deliver so you don't sour the relationships with those people that are most important to you.
Thanks heaps for listening. We'll catch you next time.
Congratulations on being part of a select group of savvy business owners who are taking their businesses to the next level. And to help you on your journey, don't forget to check out our show notes for a copy of our free book, The Profitable Tradie, and other valuable resources. Thanks for being a part of this special group, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Profitable Tradie podcast.